As my brother smirked across the mahogany table, clutching the title deed like a winning lottery ticket, I made a promise to myself. One day, I'd make that house mine again. But not for them. My name is Juliet, and I'm about to tell you how I destroyed my family's legacy to save my own soul. The estate lawyer's voice droned on about final distributions and asset allocations, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. The family home, the Victorian masterpiece my mother and I had spent 3 summers renovating together, was going to Kent, my younger brother, the golden boy who'd never lifted a paintbrush or spent a weekend stripping wallpaper until his fingers bled. The primary residence at 847 Maple Street will transfer to Kent Blake, the lawyer announced, sliding papers across the polished table, to carry on the family legacy. Dad nodded approvingly from his leather chair. It's what makes sense. Kent needs the stability. And Juliet? He gestured vaguely in my direction. Well, you married well. You don't need the responsibility. I kept my face perfectly composed, the way I'd learned during 12 years of charity galas and corporate dinners. But inside? Inside, I was screaming. That's very generous, I said quietly, my voice steady as glass. I'm sure Kent will take excellent care of it. Kent leaned back in his chair, already looking bored. At 34, he still carried himself like the high school quarterback he'd once been, all swagger and entitlement. Don't worry, Jules. I'll keep your old room exactly the same. You know, for visits. The condescension in his voice made my teeth ache. Visits. To the house where I'd held Mom's hand during her final weeks, where I'd painted every wall, refinished every floor, planted every rose in the garden. How thoughtful, I replied. Mom would have hated this. She'd always said the house should go to whoever loved it most, whoever understood its soul. But Mom had been dead for 2 years, and apparently her wishes died with her. Now, regarding the other assets, the lawyer continued, but I barely heard him. The rest was just money, stocks, bonds, a small trust fund, nothing that mattered, nothing that held memories. Any questions about the distribution? Dad asked, looking directly at me. I met his gaze without flinching. None at all. The meeting wrapped up with handshakes and hollow pleasantries. Kent pocketed the deed like it was spare change, already talking about updating the place and bringing it into the 21st century. Each word felt like a knife between my ribs. As we filed out of the lawyer's office, Kent caught my arm. Hey, you're not upset about this, are you? I mean, you've got that massive house in Westfield. What would you need with the old place? I looked down at his hand on my sleeve, then back at his face. He genuinely believed what he was saying. In his mind, I was still the trophy wife with the perfect life, the sister who'd married up and left the family struggles behind. If only he knew. Of course not, I said, gently pulling away. You're right. I have everything I need. But that was the biggest lie I'd told all day. 6 months ago, my husband Beckett had walked out, taking not just his love but nearly everything else with him. The prenup I'd signed at 25, young and stupid and so in love, had protected his assets, not mine. The Westfield house? Gone. The cars, the jewelry, the comfortable life I'd built? All of it. Gone. I was living in a studio apartment above a coffee shop, surviving on what I'd managed to hide in a separate account and the proceeds from selling my designer handbags. My family didn't know because I hadn't told them. Pride, maybe. Or the sick certainty that they'd somehow make it my fault. Standing in that parking lot, watching Kent climb into his BMW, a car I'd helped him buy 2 Christmases ago, I felt something shift inside me. The careful composure I'd maintained for years began to crack. "Juliet?" Dad's voice cut through my thoughts. "You sure you're all right? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just tired. It's been a long day." "Well, get some rest. And don't be a stranger, okay? The house will always be your home, too." The house that was no longer mine. The home I'd never be welcome in again. Not really. Not as an equal. I nodded and walked to my car, the one asset Beckett had let me keep, probably out of guilt. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Kent in my rearview mirror, already on his phone, probably telling his friends about his inheritance. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at a photo of Mom and me painting the kitchen cabinets sunshine yellow. She'd chosen that color because it made her happy, she said, because even on the darkest days, walking into that kitchen felt like stepping into light. I traced her face with my finger and made that promise again, this time out loud. "I'm going to get it back, Mom. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to make this right." The photo smiled back at me, frozen in a moment when the world still made sense, when love mattered more than money, and family meant something more than bloodlines and legal documents. I had no idea then how perfectly the universe was about to align in my favor. 3 months after losing the house, I was selling my wedding ring at a pawn shop downtown. "Best I can do is $800, the clerk said, barely glancing at the 2-carat diamond that had once symbolized forever. "It's worth at least $3,000, I protested. He shrugged. "Not to me, it isn't. Take it or leave it." I took it. I needed groceries more than I needed memories. That's how far I'd fallen. From charity board member to haggling over jewelry with a guy who smelled like cigarettes, and regret. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks earlier, and Beckett's lawyers had been thorough. Ruthless, even. My phone buzzed as I walked out of the pawn shop. Julia, my friend from law school, who'd somehow remained loyal through everything. "Coffee?" Her text read. "I have news." We met at our usual spot, a little cafe near her office. Julia looked polished as always in her navy suit, while I wore jeans and a sweater I'd bought at Target. The contrast wasn't lost on either of us. "You look tired," she said, sliding a latte across the table. "I am tired. I'm working double shifts at the real estate office just to make rent." "How's that going?" I stirred my coffee, watching the foam swirl. "Better than expected, actually. Turns out I'm good at this. Really good." It was true. After Beckett left, I'd needed work, fast. Real estate seemed logical. I'd always had an eye for properties, and I understood what wealthy buyers wanted. What I hadn't expected was how much I'd love the hunt. Finding undervalued properties, seeing their potential, negotiating deals. It felt like solving puzzles. "I've been studying investment strategies," I continued, "watching YouTube videos, reading books. Did you know you can buy foreclosed properties for pennies on the dollar?" Julia raised an eyebrow. "Planning to become a real estate mogul?" "Maybe. I flipped a small condo last month. Made $15,000 profit." "Juliet, that's amazing!" "It's survival." I took a sip of coffee. "But you said you had news." Julia's expression shifted. She pulled out her phone and showed me a news article. "Your brother's been busy." The headline read, "Local man loses $200K in cryptocurrency scam." There was Kent's photo, looking sheepish outside a courthouse. "Jesus," I whispered, reading the details. "He borrowed against the house?" Gets worse. My sources say he's been gambling too. High-stakes poker games, the kind where people break legs when you don't pay up. I stared at the article, my mind racing. How much does he owe? More than the house is worth, from what I hear. The bank's already started foreclosure proceedings. The irony was suffocating. Kent, the responsible one, the heir to the family legacy, the golden boy who was supposed to carry on the Blake name. Do Mom and Dad know? I asked. Not yet. But they will soon. The foreclosure notice gets published in the paper next week. I set down my coffee cup, my hands surprisingly steady. What happens to the house? Public auction, probably in 6 to 8 weeks. Julia leaned forward. Juliet, I know that look. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about justice. That's not justice. That's revenge. Sometimes they're the same thing. Julia was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. If you're serious about this, you'll need to move fast, and you'll need to be smart about it. I opened the folder. Inside were documents about setting up investment trusts, anonymous bidding procedures, property acquisition strategies. You researched all this? I asked. I've been watching your family dynamics for years. I figured this day might come eventually. She paused. The question is, what do you want to do with it? I thought about Kent's smirk when he'd gotten the deed, about Dad's dismissive wave, about Mom's memory being trampled by their greed and stupidity. I want to buy it back. And then? I don't know yet, but I know I can't let strangers have it. Julia nodded slowly. We'd need to set up a trust. Keep your name off everything until after the sale. Can you get the money together? I've got about 50,000 saved from the flipping. I could get a loan for the rest. It's risky if the bidding goes too high. It won't. Who else wants a house in that neighborhood with that much baggage? Julia smiled for the first time since I'd sat down. You've really thought about this. I've thought about nothing else. She gathered the papers. All right, let me make some calls. We'll need to move quickly and quietly. As we left the cafe, Julia caught my arm. Juliet, are you sure about this? Once we start down this path, there's no going back. I looked at her, this woman who'd stuck by me when everyone else had written me off, who'd helped me pick up the pieces when my perfect life shattered. They gave away something that was never theirs to give, I said. Now they get to live with the consequences. That night, I sat in my studio apartment with the foreclosure documents spread across my tiny kitchen table. The house would go up for auction in exactly 43 days. I opened my laptop and started researching auction procedures, bidding strategies, property values in the neighborhood. By morning, I had a plan. Kent had no idea what was coming. None of them did. But they were about to learn that underestimating Juliet Blake was the biggest mistake they'd ever made. The trust paperwork was finalized on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I was parked across the street from my childhood home, watching Kent pace the front porch while screaming into his phone. No, you don't understand. His voice carried across the quiet neighborhood. I just need 2 more weeks. The crypto market's about to turn around. I rolled down my window slightly, straining to hear. What do you mean the house is already scheduled for auction? That's impossible. Julia had done her homework. The Maple Street Investment Trust was registered in Delaware, completely anonymous. Even if Kent hired a private investigator, they'd hit a wall of legal paperwork that would take months to untangle. My phone buzzed. Text from Julia. Auction confirmed for next Friday, 10 a.m. You ready for this? I typed back, more than ready. That weekend, I drove past the house again. This time both my parents' cars were in the driveway. Through the living room window, I could see them gesturing wildly. Kent sat slumped in Dad's old recliner, head in his hands. The foreclosure notice had been published in the paper that morning. By now, the whole neighborhood knew. Monday morning, I was showing a client a downtown condo when my phone rang. Mom. I'm sorry. I need to take this, I told my client, stepping into the hallway. Juliet, honey, we need to talk. Mom's voice was strained, barely controlled. What's wrong? It's Kent. There's been a situation with the house. I let the silence stretch, waiting. The bank is foreclosing. Some kind of gambling debts. We had no idea he'd been borrowing against the property. Oh my God, Mom. I'm so sorry. We're meeting with lawyers, trying to figure out options. But the auction is this Friday, and we just don't have the money to stop it. How much would you need? Nearly $400,000. We've already mortgaged everything else trying to help him. I closed my eyes, picturing Mom's face. The desperation in her voice was real, and for a moment, I almost wavered. I wish I could help, I said, but after the divorce, I'm barely keeping my head above water. Of course, sweetheart. I wouldn't ask. I needed to tell someone who'd understand what this house means. After she hung up, I stood in that hallway for 5 minutes, staring at my phone. My client eventually came looking for me. Everything okay? She asked. Family drama, I said, forcing a smile. Shall we continue the tour? The auction was held on the courthouse steps. I arrived early, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, parking 3 blocks away. About 20 people had gathered, mostly investors and curiosity seekers. Lawrence, the auctioneer, was a thin man with a clipboard and a microphone that squealed feedback every few minutes. Next property, 847 Maple Street, he announced. Victorian home, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. Starting bid is $200,000. I spotted Kent near the back of the crowd, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dad stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Mom was nowhere to be seen. 200,000. Do I hear 210? A man in a suit raised his hand. 210. 220. Lawrence scanned the crowd. I waited, let them bid it up a little. 230. 240. At 260, only 3 bidders remained. The man in the suit, an older woman with a contractor's clipboard, and me. 270, I called out, my voice steady. Kent's head snapped around, searching the crowd, but with my hat and sunglasses, I was just another face. 280, the woman counted. The man in the suit shook his head and stepped back. 290, I said. The woman hesitated, then raised her hand. 300. I could see Kent whispering frantically to Dad, pointing at the bidders. Dad was shaking his head, his face red with frustration. 320, I called out. The woman looked at her clipboard, calculating. After a long moment, she stepped back too. 320 going once, Lawrence announced. Going twice. Kent broke from the crowd, pushing forward. Wait, this is my house. You can't just... Sir, please step back, Lawrence said firmly. This is a legal proceeding. 320 going 3 times, sold to bidder number 7. I walked forward, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Lawrence handed me the paperwork. Congratulations, he said. The property transfers to the Maple Street Investment Trust. I signed the documents with a steady hand, then turned to walk away. As I passed Kent, our eyes met for just a moment. He looked confused, desperate, broken. "Excuse me?" he called after me. "Are you planning to flip this property?" I stopped, turned back. "I haven't decided yet. It's just, this was my family's home. If you're looking to sell, maybe we could work something out." I studied his face, the same face that had smirked at me across the lawyer's table 6 months ago. "I'll be in touch," I said. As I walked back to my car, I heard Dad's voice behind me. "Who the hell was that?" I drove home in silence, the deed sitting on my passenger seat. That night, I called Julia. "It's done," I said. "How do you feel?" I looked around my tiny studio apartment, then at the deed to my childhood home. Like I'm finally ready to go home. The key turned in the lock, like it had been waiting for me. I stood in the doorway of 847 Maple Street for the first time in 2 years, breathing in the familiar scent of old wood and Mom's lavender sachets. The house felt different, emptier somehow, like it had been holding its breath. "Hello, old friend," I whispered, stepping inside. The hardwood floors Mom and I had refinished still gleamed, despite Kent's neglect. But the walls told a different story. He'd painted over my careful color choices with generic beige. The kitchen where Mom had taught me to make her famous apple pie was now stark white, sterile, and cold. I walked through each room, cataloguing the damage. Kent had removed most of Mom's furniture, probably sold it to pay his debts. The built-in bookshelves I'd spent a summer installing were empty. Even the curtains were gone. In Mom's old bedroom, I found the only thing Kent had left behind, a framed photo of our family from Christmas 5 years ago. We all looked so happy, so normal. I picked it up, studying our faces. "What would you think of all this, Mom?" I asked the empty room. My phone rang. Julia. "How's the house?" she asked. "Sad, but salvageable." I walked to the window, looking out at the garden Mom had loved. The roses were overgrown, the vegetable patch choked with weeds. "It needs work, but the bones are good." "What's the plan?" "I'm not sure yet. I just needed to be here first, you know?" "Take your time. You've got all the time in the world now." After Julia hung up, I continued my tour. The basement still held Mom's old paint cans and gardening tools. The attic was full of boxes Kent hadn't bothered to go through, probably didn't even know were there. I was coming back downstairs when I heard voices outside. Through the front window, I saw a woman sitting on my porch steps. She looked young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were worn, but clean. I opened the front door. "Can I help you?" She jumped up, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was here. The house has been empty for weeks." "It's okay. I'm the new owner. What's your name?" "Esme." She shifted nervously. "I've been staying in the park down the street, and sometimes I come here to sit. The porch gets good morning sun, and it feels safe." I looked at her more closely. Her backpack was stuffed full, and she had that careful alertness of someone who'd learned to sleep with one eye open. "Are you homeless?" I asked gently. Her cheeks flushed. "Temporarily displaced. I'm working on getting back on my feet." "What happened?" Esme hesitated, then sat back down on the steps. "My ex-husband. He got violent, so I left. But he had all the money, all the credit cards in his name. I've been trying to save up for a deposit on an apartment, but it's hard when you're spending everything on food and laundry." I sat down beside her. "How long have you been on the street?" 3 months. There's a waiting list for the women's shelter across town, but it's 6 months long. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the neighborhood wake up. Mrs. Patterson from next door was walking her ancient beagle. The mailman waved as he passed. "This used to be my family's house," I said finally. "Really? It's beautiful. Even empty, you can tell it was loved." "My mother and I renovated it together. Every room has a story." Esme smiled. "That's nice. Having a place that's really yours, I mean. I've never had that." Something clicked in my mind, an idea so perfect, so right, that it took my breath away. "Esme, what if I told you I was thinking about turning this house into a place where women like you could stay, not just temporarily, but long enough to really get back on their feet?" Her eyes widened. "Like a shelter?" "More than that. A place where you could have your own room, learn job skills, save money. A place that treats you like a person, not a problem to be managed." "That would be incredible." "But why would you do that?" I looked at the house, seeing it with new eyes, not as the family legacy that had been stolen from me, but as something bigger, something Mom would have loved. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," I said, "and because this house was meant to help people." Esme was quiet for a long moment. "Would you really do that?" "I think I would, but I'd need help, someone who understands what women in your situation actually need." "I could help," she said quickly. "I mean, if you're serious. I know a lot of women who are struggling, and I'm good at organizing things, managing schedules." I stood up, brushing off my jeans. "Want to see the inside? Help me figure out how to make this work?" Esme's face lit up. "Really? Really? But first, are you hungry? There's a diner down the street that makes amazing pancakes." As we walked toward town, Esme chattering excitedly about room layouts and safety protocols, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. Kent had wanted to carry on the family legacy. Well, now he'd get his wish, just not the way he'd imagined. That evening, I called Julia again. "I know what I'm doing with the house," I said. "Oh. I'm turning it into a women's shelter, a place where they can rebuild their lives." Julia was quiet for a moment. "That's actually brilliant, and it'll drive your family absolutely insane." "That's just a bonus," I said, smiling. "The real reason is it's what Mom would have wanted." "When do we start?" "Tomorrow. I've got a lot of work to do." The call came at 7 in the morning, 3 weeks into renovations. "Juliet, we need to talk." Mom's voice was tight, controlled. "Can you meet us for coffee this morning?" I was standing in what used to be the formal dining room, watching contractors install safety locks on the windows. Esme was in the kitchen, sketching out meal plans for future residents. "I'm pretty busy today, Mom. Can we do this over the phone?" "No. This is important. The Sunrise Cafe on Main Street. 1 hour." She hung up before I could respond. I found them at a corner table, both looking like they'd aged 5 years in the past month. Dad's hair was grayer. Mom's hands shook slightly as she stirred her coffee. "You look tired," I said, sliding into the booth across from them. "We are tired," Dad replied. "We've been dealing with Kent's mess for weeks. The lawyers, the creditors, the shame of it all." Mom leaned forward. "But that's not why we asked you here. We heard something interesting yesterday." "Oh." "Margaret Patterson called. She said there's been construction activity at the house. Trucks, workers, people coming and going." I sipped my coffee, saying nothing. "She also said she saw you there," Dad continued, multiple times, with keys. The moment had arrived. I'd been preparing for this conversation for weeks, but my heart still hammered against my ribs. That's right, I said simply. Mom's face went white. Juliet, please tell me you didn't... I bought it back, at the auction. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Dad's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. You bought our family home? His voice was barely controlled. I bought the house that was being foreclosed on, yes. But why didn't you tell us? Mom's voice cracked. We could have worked something out. Kept it in the family properly. Like you kept it in the family when you gave it to Kent? When you decided I didn't need it because I'd married well? Dad's face flushed red. That's different. Kent was supposed to what? Gamble it away, because that's exactly what he did. We didn't know about his problems, Mom said desperately. If we had known. You would have what? Given it to me instead. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. We both know that's not true. Mom reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled back. Sweetheart, I know you're hurt, but this is still our family home. Surely you can understand why we're upset. I understand perfectly. You're upset because you lost control. Dad slammed his palm on the table, making the silverware jump. Don't you dare speak to your mother that way. We raised you better than this. You raised me to be grateful for scraps, to smile and nod while you gave away everything I'd worked for. The house belongs with family, Mom said, tears starting to fall. Not with strangers. You're right. It does belong with family, but not this family. Not anymore. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I'd taken that morning. The freshly painted bedrooms, the new furniture being delivered, the sign being installed by the front door. Haven't house? Dad read aloud. A Blake legacy reimagined. His voice was hollow. What is this? It's a women's shelter, a place where women who've been abandoned, abused, or forgotten can rebuild their lives. Mom stared at the photos, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. You turned our family home into a homeless shelter? Dad's voice rose, drawing stares from other customers. I turned an empty house into something useful, something that helps people. This is insane, Mom whispered. This is cruel. What's cruel is giving someone's inheritance to their brother because you think he deserves it more. What's cruel is never once calling to check how I was doing after my divorce. We thought you were fine, Mom protested. You never said. I never said because you never asked. You assumed I was fine because it was convenient to assume that. Dad leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a stranger. So, this is revenge. You're destroying our family legacy out of spite? I'm not destroying anything. I'm transforming it. Mom always said this house should help people. Now it will. Your mother meant help family. Dad snapped. Maybe family should have helped me when I needed it. Mom was crying openly now. Please, Juliet, we can fix this. We can work together. You could move back in, manage the property. We could make this right. It's too late for that. It's never too late, she pleaded. We're your parents. We love you. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my untouched coffee. If you loved me, you would have given me the house in the first place. If you loved me, you would have called when my marriage fell apart. If you loved me, you wouldn't be sitting here trying to guilt me into giving up the one thing I've managed to rebuild. Where are you going? Mom called after me. Home, to my house, to finish what I started. I was almost to the door when Dad's voice stopped me. "We're ashamed of you." I turned back, looking at these two people who'd raised me, who'd shaped me, who'd ultimately failed me when it mattered most. "No," I said quietly. "You're ashamed you lost your power over me. There's a difference." Outside, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands shaking. My phone buzzed with a text from Esme. "The new bed's arrived. This place is really starting to feel like home." I smiled through my tears and drove back to Maple Street, back to the house that was finally, truly, mine. The phone call started that afternoon. "Juliet, this is your Aunt Carol. I just heard what you've done with the family house and I am appalled." I was in the kitchen, helping Esme organize donated supplies, when my phone rang for the 5th time in 2 hours. "Hi, Aunt Carol. How could you do this to your parents? To Kent? That boy is devastated." Kent is 34 years old. He's not a boy. "Don't get smart with me, young lady. Your uncle and I are disgusted by this vindictive behavior." I put the phone on speaker so Esme could hear. She raised her eyebrows and continued sorting canned goods. "I'm helping women get back on their feet. How is that vindictive?" "You know exactly what you're doing. You're punishing your family because you didn't get your way." "I'm using my property to help people who need it." "Your property? That house has been in our family for 3 generations. And now it's helping people who actually need help, instead of sitting empty while someone gambles away their inheritance." Aunt Carol hung up on me. "Wow," Esme said. "Your family's really upset about this." "They'll get over it." But they didn't get over it. The calls kept coming. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, family friends, even my high school guidance counselor somehow got my number. By evening, I'd turned off my phone. The next morning, I posted the first photo on social media. Just a simple shot of the front porch with the new sign, "Haven House, opening soon." The caption read, "Sometimes the best way to honor a family legacy is to transform it into something that actually helps people. Coming soon, a safe space for women rebuilding their lives. Second chances, community, hope." Within hours, the post had dozens of likes and supportive comments, but it also drew attention I wasn't expecting. I was painting the last bedroom when Esme called up the stairs. "Juliet, there's a reporter here." I found a young woman with a notebook standing on my front porch, next to a photographer. "Ms. Blake, I'm Sarah from the County Herald. We'd love to do a story about your shelter project." "I'm not really ready for press yet." "We heard this used to be your family home. That's such an interesting angle, turning a personal space into a community resource." Before I could respond, a car pulled up to the curb. Kent got out, looking haggard and desperate. "Perfect timing," Sarah murmured, signaling her photographer. "Juliet," Kent called out, jogging toward the porch. "We need to talk." "I'm sorry, but this isn't a good time," I told the reporter. "Is that your brother?" Sarah asked. "The one who lost the house?" Kent reached the porch, breathing hard. He looked terrible, unshaven, clothes wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. "Jules, please, just 5 minutes." "Kent, there are reporters here?" He glanced at Sarah and her photographer, then back at me. "I don't care. I need to talk to you." "Maybe we should do this privately," I said, but Sarah was already taking notes. "This is my family's house," Kent said, his voice rising. "You can't just steal it and turn it into some charity project." "I didn't steal anything. I bought it at a legal auction." "You knew I was in trouble. You could have helped me save it." The photographer's camera clicked rapidly. "Like you helped me when Beckett left?" I asked. "Oh, wait, you didn't even know because none of you bothered to check on me." "That's different." "How is it different?" Kent ran his hands through his hair, looking around wildly. "Because I'm family. Because this house means something." "It means something to me, too. That's why I'm making sure it actually helps people instead of being gambled away." "You're destroying everything Mom built." "Mom built a home full of love and acceptance. I'm continuing that legacy." "By turning it into a homeless shelter?" "By turning it into a place where women can rebuild their lives. Women like Esme here, who escaped an abusive marriage and just needed someone to believe in her." Esme stepped forward. "I was living in the park before Juliet helped me. Now I have a safe place to sleep and a chance to start over." Kent looked at Esme like he was seeing her for the first time. This is insane." "What's insane is thinking you deserved this house more than I did just because you're a man." "That's not why." "Isn't it? Dad said I didn't need the responsibility because I'd married well. You got it because you were supposed to carry on the family name." "Well, congratulations, Kent. You carried it right into bankruptcy court." Kent's face crumpled. "I lost everything, Jules. Everything. I don't have anywhere to go." For a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You had everything handed to you your entire life. The house, the family business connections, Mom and Dad's unconditional support. And you threw it all away." "I made mistakes." "You made choices, and now you get to live with them." Kent looked around desperately, at the reporters, at Esme, at the house he'd lost. "I gave you everything," he said, his voice breaking. I met his eyes, remembering every slight, every dismissal, every time I'd been overlooked in favor of the golden boy. "Now, you know how it feels?" Kent stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. Sarah scribbled furiously in her notebook. "This is quite a story. When can we schedule a proper interview?" "Next week," I said, "after we're officially open." As the reporters left, Esme touched my arm. "Are you okay?" That looked hard. "It was necessary," I said, watching Kent's car disappear around the corner. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." I deleted it and went back to painting. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for 10 in the morning. By 9:30, nearly 50 people had gathered on the front lawn. "I can't believe this many people came," Esme whispered, adjusting the microphone we'd borrowed from the community center. "Small towns love a good story," I replied, smoothing my navy dress, especially one about second chances. The mayor was there, along with several city council members, local business owners who'd donated supplies, volunteers who'd helped with renovations. Even some of my old real estate clients had shown up. Sarah from the Herald was back, this time with a bigger camera crew. The story had been picked up by regional news outlets after her article ran. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor began, "we're here today to celebrate the opening of Haven House, a remarkable example of turning personal tragedy into community triumph." I stepped up to the microphone, my hands surprisingly steady. 3 months ago, this house was empty and forgotten. Today, it's a home again, not just for the women who'll live here, but for all of us who believe everyone deserves a second chance. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. "I want to introduce you to Esme, who'll be our resident coordinator. She's going to tell you what Haven House really means. Esme approached the microphone nervously, then seemed to find her strength. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in my car, she began. My husband had convinced me I was worthless, that no one would ever help me. I believed him. The crowd grew quiet. But Juliet saw something different. She saw potential where everyone else saw a problem. She gave me not just a room, but a purpose. Esme's voice grew stronger. Haven House isn't just about shelter. It's about believing in yourself again. Tears pricked my eyes as the crowd erupted in genuine applause. Now, I said, returning to the microphone, let's officially open Haven House. I lifted the scissors to cut the blue ribbon stretched across the front door. The cameras clicked, people cheered, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Then I saw the car. Dad's silver sedan pulled up to the curb, and both my parents got out. They looked older, more fragile than they had at the coffee shop. Mom clutched Dad's arm as they approached the crowd. The celebration continued around us, but I felt frozen. Several people noticed my parents and began whispering. Juliet! Mom called out, pushing through the crowd. We need to see this! The mayor paused mid-sentence. Sarah's photographer swiveled toward the commotion. Mom, Dad, this isn't the time. No, it's exactly the time, Dad said, his voice carrying across the lawn. We need to see what you've done to our family home. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Esme moved closer to me, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Would you like a tour? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Yes, Mom said. We would. I led them through the front door, the crowd following at a respectful distance. The foyer gleamed with fresh paint and new furniture. Family photos had been replaced with inspirational quotes and community resources. This was your grandmother's sitting room, Mom whispered, staring at what was now a counseling office. Now it's where women can get help finding jobs and housing, I replied. We moved through the house. The formal dining room had become a computer lab. The library was now a children's playroom for residents' kids. Mom's old bedroom was divided into 2 smaller rooms, each with a single bed and dresser. You've destroyed it, Dad said finally, standing in what used to be his den. You've erased our entire history. I've repurposed it, given it new life. This isn't what your mother would have wanted, he continued, his voice rising. The crowd in the hallway grew quiet, straining to hear. A place that helps women start over. Sounds exactly like her, I said. She meant family, Mom burst out. She wanted this house to stay in the family. Then maybe the family should have acted like family. We made one mistake. You made a choice. You chose Kent over me. You chose tradition over fairness. You chose your comfort over my feelings. Dad stepped closer, his face red with anger. We gave you everything growing up. We supported your marriage, your choices. You supported the version of me that made you comfortable, the trophy wife who smiled and stayed quiet. That's not true. Isn't it? When's the last time you asked about my dreams, my goals? When did you ever see me as more than Kent's sister or Beckett's wife? Mom was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. We're your parents. We love you. You love the idea of me, the version that doesn't challenge you or make you uncomfortable. The crowd had grown completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes. We were wrong, Mom said suddenly, her voice breaking. We should have given you the house. We should have seen how much it meant to you. The admission hung in the air like smoke, That's why I had to take it, I said quietly. Dad looked around the transformed house, at the women's faces watching from doorways, at the signs of new life everywhere. You've made something beautiful from the ashes, he said finally. I hope someday you can forgive us. He turned and walked toward the front door. Mom hesitated, looking back at me one more time. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Your mother would be proud too. Then they were gone, leaving me standing in the hallway surrounded by strangers who'd witnessed the most painful conversation of my life. Esme squeezed my hand. Are you okay? I looked around at the house that was finally, truly mine, at the women who would call it home, at the future we were building from the ruins of the past. I'm perfect, I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between utility bills and donation acknowledgements. No return address, just my name written in Mom's careful script. I found it while sorting mail in the kitchen, where Esme was teaching 3 residents how to make her grandmother's cornbread recipe. The house buzzed with the comfortable chaos of women rebuilding their lives, children's laughter from the playroom, the hum of the washing machine, someone practicing job interview questions in the living room. Everything okay? Esme asked, noticing me staring at the envelope. Just family stuff, I said, slipping it into my pocket. That evening, after the residents had settled into their routines, I sat on the front porch swing Mom and I had hung together 15 years ago. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights glowing like fireflies. I opened the letter. Juliet. I don't expect you to respond to this. I'm not even sure I deserve to write it. But there are things I need to say, even if you never want to hear from me again. You were right about everything. We failed you in ways I'm only beginning to understand. When your father and I decided to give Kent the house, we told ourselves we were being practical. Kent needed stability, and you had Beckett. But the truth is, we were being cowards. It was easier to give Kent what he expected than to challenge the way we'd always done things. It was easier to assume you were fine than to ask if you needed help. It was easier to maintain the status quo than to admit we'd raised you to be strong and then punished you for that strength. I drove by the house yesterday. I saw Maria hanging laundry in the backyard, the same spot where I used to hang yours and Kent's clothes when you were small. I saw children playing in the garden where you and I planted those roses. I saw women sitting on the porch, talking and laughing the way neighbors used to do. You made something beautiful from the ashes. I hope someday you can forgive us. I won't contact you again unless you want me to, but I needed you to know you didn't take the house from us. You saved it. Love. Mom. I folded the letter and sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of home around me. Juliet? A small voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Lily, Maria's 6-year-old daughter, peeking through the screen door. What's up, sweetheart? Mama says to ask if you want some cookies. We made chocolate chip. I'd love some cookies. Lily disappeared and returned with a paper plate piled high with slightly lopsided cookies. She climbed onto the swing beside me. Are you sad? She asked, studying my face with the directness only children possess. A little, but it's okay to be sad sometimes. Mama says you saved us. Is that true? I looked at this little girl who'd arrived 3 weeks ago with nothing but a stuffed rabbit and trust issues. Now she was making cookies and asking questions and sleeping through the night without nightmares. I think maybe we saved each other, I said. That's what Mama says too. We ate cookies in comfortable silence, watching fireflies blink in the garden. The next morning, I was in my office, Mom's old sewing room, when Esme knocked. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says he's your brother." I found Kent standing awkwardly in the foyer, holding a small potted plant. He looked different, cleaner, healthier, like he'd been sleeping and eating regularly. "Hi, Jules." "Kent. I brought this for the house. It's a peace lily. The lady at the garden centre said they're good for new beginnings." I accepted the plant, surprised by the gesture. "I'm in a program now," he said. "Gambling addiction, financial counselling, the whole thing. Part of it is making amends to people I've hurt." "Okay. I know I can't undo what I did. I know I lost something that was never really mine to lose, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better." "That's good, Kent. I'm glad you're getting help." He looked around the transformed foyer, taking in the bulletin board full of job postings and success stories, the children's artwork taped to the walls. "This is really something," he said, "what you've built here. It's what the house was meant to be." "Yeah, I think you're right." He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago." After he left, I placed the peace lily on the kitchen windowsill, next to the herbs Esme had been growing. That afternoon, I was helping Carmen practice for her nursing school interview when my phone rang. Julia. "Turn on Channel 7, she said. "You're going to want to see this." I found the remote and switched to the local news. There was Haven House on screen, and there was me, standing on the front porch during the ribbon cutting. What started as one woman's personal mission has become a model for community-based solutions to homelessness, the anchor was saying. Haven House has already helped 12 women transition to independent living, and there's a waiting list of organizations hoping to replicate their success. The segment showed interviews with residents, shots of the computer lab and job training programs, footage of children playing in the backyard. "Pretty amazing what you've accomplished," Carmen said, squeezing my shoulder. I looked around the living room, at Carmen studying her textbooks, at Esme coordinating volunteer schedules, at the photos on the mantel showing graduation ceremonies and job celebrations and families reunited. "We've accomplished," I corrected, "all of us together." That evening, I sat on the porch swing again, Mom's letter in my lap. The house hummed with life around me. Dinner preparations, homework help, the gentle rhythm of women supporting each other through the hard work of starting over. I pulled out my phone and typed a simple text to the number I'd never deleted. "Thank you for the letter. The house is exactly where it needs to be." The response came quickly. "I love you. I'm proud of you. Always." I placed the letter on the mantel next to the photos of our residents' achievements, then walked through the house, turning off lights and checking locks. In the kitchen, tomorrow's breakfast supplies were already laid out. In the living room, someone had left a thank you note on the coffee table. In the playroom, toys were neatly arranged for another day of children's laughter. This was home, not the house I'd grown up in, but the home I'd chosen to create. Not the legacy I'd inherited, but the one I'd built with my own hands. I didn't take back the house for them. I took it back for every woman who'd ever been told she didn't need it, didn't deserve it, couldn't handle it. I took it back for all of us.
My name is Stella Barrett, and on the night of my sister's wedding, my own father told a circle of guests that I was just the Special Forces cleaning lady. The words slid through the laughter, like a blade sharp enough to nick something deep. I'd been standing close enough to smell the citrus in his champagne, close enough to see the smirk that always came when he thought he was being clever. No one in that circle knew what I actually did in the Navy. Most days, neither did he. I didn't correct him. Not then. I smiled the kind of smile you learn in uniform-controlled, unreadable, and turned toward the tent where the jazz band played under strings of amber lights. My sister was radiant in her gown, spinning between tables like a scene cut from a movie. I wanted her day to stay perfect, but 5 minutes later, a voice cut through the music. Oh my God! Is that her on TV? It came from a teenager in a navy suit at a back table. His phone held high enough for the people around him to lean in. Heads started to turn. Glasses paused midair. A ripple passed through the room, the kind that makes you instinctively brace for impact. Across the tent, my father's posture stiffened. He was still holding his champagne by the stem when his eyes found me. Confusion flickered. Then something else, something that made his grip falter. And then it happened. The sharp crash of crystal hitting hardwood split the reception in two. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Every gaze landed on me. I hadn't planned to be the center of attention. But once the truth started spilling out across that white tent, there was no tucking it neatly back where it had been hiding. The reception was held in a historic riverfront estate in Savannah, the kind of place that wore its age proudly. Brick pathways curled between manicured gardens, and Spanish moss hung from the oaks like silver veils. The late summer air carried the scent of salt water and something sweet from the dessert table inside. I'd flown in from the West Coast the night before, still carrying the rhythm of base life in my muscles' early PT runs. The constant hum of servers in the operations wing. The quiet focus of a briefing room before a mission. I wore my dress whites because Rachel, my sister, had asked me to. She'd said it would look epic in photos, and I'd wanted to make her happy. For the first hour, I did what you do at weddings, shook hands with relatives I hadn't seen in years, nodded through conversations about jobs and kids, and let the jazz quartet fill the empty spaces. My father, Victor Hale, was easy to spot near the open bar, his tall frame and silver hair giving him an unmissable presence. Retired brigadier general, a man who could command a room without trying, and who seemed to feel more at home among military brass than with his own children. I was about to join a conversation with an old family friend when I heard that laugh, sharp, theatrical, the one he used when telling a story he thought was especially good. "She's the Special Forces cleaning lady," he said, grinning at the circle of men around him. Some laughed politely, others genuinely. The words landed harder than they should have. He'd made versions of that joke before, always in that same tone that pretended it was harmless. But tonight, with Rachel's wedding unfolding in the kind of perfect light you couldn't buy, it stung differently. A few guests glanced over at me. I gave them the same tight smile I'd given countless men in briefing rooms who underestimated me before I'd even opened my mouth. Then I turned, moving through the crowd as if I hadn't heard a thing. Inside, the familiar heat was rising. Years of being measured against his impossible yardstick had taught me to hold it in, to keep my posture straight, my voice steady. But it didn't make the words hurt any less. What I didn't know then was that the night wasn't going to let me keep quiet, not this time. Something was coming that would strip away the old script my father had been reading from for years. Growing up with Victor Hale as a father meant living under constant inspection. Our house wasn't just a home, it was a training ground. There were rules about how to stand, how to speak, even how to set the table. And there was always an unspoken scoreboard, measuring worth in medals and combat tours. In his eyes, real military service meant being on the front lines with a rifle in your hands. Anything else, logistics, intelligence, technical support, was background noise. Necessary, maybe, but not worthy of respect. When I enlisted at 19, it wasn't for the paycheck. I wanted his approval. I wanted him to see me as someone who could carry the weight, who belonged in the same league as the men he admired. I pushed myself through boot camp, specialized training, and the long, grinding weeks that came with working in naval special operations support. My first assignment was in an intelligence unit planning routes, coordinating with joint task forces, managing the flow of equipment and information. He visited once, walked through the operations center, nodded at the wall of screens, and later asked over dinner if I ever did anything outside an air-conditioned building. That was his way. The comments weren't always cruel in tone. Sometimes they were almost casual, tossed out like small stones that still managed to hit their mark. And after enough years, they stopped feeling like isolated moments. They became the background hum of how my family saw me. There was one turning point I never told him about when I tried for the grueling selection process to qualify for an elite special warfare support unit. It wasn't to become a commando. I knew my lane. But it meant enduring the same punishing physical trials, surf torture, endless log carries, miles in soft sand. I made it until a stress fracture in my leg took me out. I thought that was the end. A commander I respected pulled me aside and told me I wasn't done. I was just going through a different door. That door led me into the logistical command that kept Special Forces missions alive. We were ghosts behind the ghosts. But try explaining that to someone who measured value in firefights. And so, by the time Rachel's wedding came, I'd stopped expecting anything different from him. What I didn't realize was that fate had a way of arranging its own counterattacks. 2 years before the wedding, I'd been assigned to a joint task force operating out of the Pacific. It was the kind of deployment where dates blurred into each other, phone calls were monitored, and you learned to stop counting the days. Our work wasn't meant to make headlines, it was meant to make sure certain people came home alive. The mission kicked off on a humid night in May. A small team of special operations divers had gone missing in the Philippine Sea during what was supposed to be a low-visibility reconnaissance patrol. Intelligence suggested they'd been captured and moved to a fishing village loyal to an armed militia. Every hour that passed made the odds worse. I wasn't there to kick down doors. My job was to make sure the people who did had everything they needed to get in and out without leaving a trace. That meant securing an unmarked vessel capable of hugging the coastline without tripping radar. It meant finding a way to mask our encrypted comms as harmless chatter between local fishing boats. It meant arranging for aerial surveillance that wouldn't alert foreign eyes and doing it all in less than 48 hours. Half the command wanted to abort when a typhoon warning hit, but storms cut both ways. The same weather that made our route dangerous could also cover our approach. I greenlit the plan, knowing full well that if it failed, the fallout would land squarely on my shoulders. We pushed the supply drop through the outer bands of the storm on a small cargo plane with a forged manifest. Inside were medical kits, ammunition, and the extraction harnesses they'd use just hours later. From a darkened control room, I listened to the operation unfold, rain hammering the tin roof, voices crackling through my headset. When the call came, package secure, I let out one slow breath and finally unclenched my fists. They slipped away into the storm like they'd never been there at all. 2 weeks later, I was back stateside, sitting at my father's kitchen table while he asked if I'd done anything interesting lately. I told him no, because that's the job. You measure victories in lives saved, not in applause, and the only people who truly understand are the ones who were there with you. Back in the wedding tent, the hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware almost managed to drown out the echo of my father's joke. Almost. The words were still there, threaded through my thoughts like static I couldn't turn off. Victor was planted near the bar, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing as he spoke to a group of uncles, old army friends, and a couple of family acquaintances. Every so often, I'd catch fragments, real soldiers, front lines, paper pushers followed by polite chuckles. As I passed, I felt the way eyes shifted toward me, the subtle assessing glance of people who'd already been primed to see me as something less. Rachel intercepted me with a quick hug, her veil brushing my cheek. She was glowing, her entire world that night wrapped up in flowers, vows, and the man she'd just married. I hugged her back, careful not to let the tightness in my chest seep into my smile. She adjusted the fall of my jacket, made a light comment about how sharp I looked, and drifted off to greet another table. When the photographer called for the wedding party, I stood in formation with the others, the stark white of my uniform cutting a clear line among the tuxedos and pastel dresses. From my spot, I could see my father's relaxed posture, the confidence of a man certain his version of the story was the only one worth telling. In the Navy, I'd learned to use underestimation as a kind of cover. Let people think they know your limits, and they'll never see you coming. But this wasn't a mission. This was personal. One of Rachel's college friends leaned over during the photo lineup. "Do you actually work with special forces? Or is that just a figure of speech?" Her tone was curious, not cruel, but I could tell she'd been fed a watered-down version of who I was. I gave her the cleanest answer I could without opening a classified file. "I work where they work." She looked intrigued. But before she could ask more, the camera clicked, and we broke formation. The toasts were about to begin, and the night had no idea it was heading straight for a rupture. The first toast came from Rachel's maid of honor, a warm, winding story that made half the guests tear up. Glasses clinked, laughter rolled through the tent, and the servers began circulating again with trays of scallops and bruschetta. I kept my smile in place, but my attention drifted. The ripple of laughter from the bar drew my eyes, even when I didn't want it to. I didn't need to hear the exact words anymore. I knew the script by heart. Janitor, paper pusher, not a real soldier. A waiter refilled my water glass with a quick, almost careless motion, the ripple breaking the reflection of the string lights above. It reminded me of the two operators I'd shaken hands with after that stormy rescue, the way one of them had said, "We wouldn't be here without you." That truth sat heavy in my chest, invisible to everyone under this white tent. The band shifted into a slow, brassy number. The low hum of conversation seemed to merge with the music, until a small saturn's sharp voice cut through it all. "Oh my God, is that her on TV?" It came from a table near the dessert bar. A teenage boy in a navy suit stared at his phone like he'd just seen something impossible. His words were loud enough for his table to hear, but when he repeated them, they carried to the edges of the tent. Chairs shifted, heads turned. The phone began passing from hand to hand, a glowing rectangle of light pulling the entire reception toward it. And there I was, on a stage I knew well. The Hall of Heroes in Washington, D.C. My dress whites were immaculate, a row of medals gleaming on my chest. The chyron across the screen read Navy Officer Honored for Distinguished Service in Classified Joint Operations. My own voice played in tinny bursts from the phone's speaker. "This award is not mine alone. It belongs to the team who stood watch when others slept, who carried the weight when others could not, and who brought our people home." The champagne flute slipped from my father's fingers. The sound of crystal shattering into a dozen pieces was the loudest thing in the room. The tent went so still, I could hear the faint fizz of champagne pooling across the wooden floor. Every head had turned toward the phone, toward me, and toward the man who now stood frozen beside the shards of glass. My father's gaze locked on mine. No smirk this time, no easy, dismissive shrug, just a stunned stillness, as if he were staring at a stranger. The teenage boy's voice carried again, almost breathless. "It's all over the news. They're calling you a hero." I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I stayed exactly where I was, letting the moment expand until there was nowhere for anyone to hide from it. The MC hesitated, microphone in hand, clearly unsure whether to proceed with the next toast or wait for whatever this was turning into. A woman near the head table, someone I barely knew, leaned forward. "Lieutenant Commander Barrett," she said softly, like she was testing the weight of the title. "Is that really you?" I rose slowly, the legs of my chair scraping against the polished floor. "It's me." My voice was steady, though my pulse was loud enough to feel in my fingertips. I walked toward the nearest table, still holding the phone. The video played again in silence, the bright stage lights washing over my recorded self as the medal was pinned to my jacket. What? What did you do? The woman in the floral dress asked. I glanced toward my father. He hadn't moved. The glass was gone from his hands now, replaced by nothing but the glitter of broken crystal at his feet. I did my job, I said. Then, after a beat. And sometimes that job takes you places you can't talk about, places where you have to make decisions fast and pray you made the right ones. The room stayed quiet, but I could feel the shift, people rearranging the picture they'd had of me. From the so-called janitor to something they didn't have a neat label for. In the back, an older man in a navy cap stood and gave me a crisp salute. My arm rose in return before I even thought about it. The MC finally found his footing, his voice lighter but careful. Well, I think we've just learned we have someone very special in the room tonight. Let's raise a glass to Lieutenant Commander Stella Barrett. Chairs scraped, glasses lifted. The toast rolled through the tent, soft but certain. I met my father's eyes over the rim of my glass. There was no smile, no apology, just the weight of something unspoken. He looked like a man staring at a coastline that didn't exist on the map he'd been drawing his whole life. I knew this wasn't going to be the moment he admitted he'd been wrong. It might never come. But I realized I didn't need it anymore. The truth was out, and nothing he could say or refuse to say would change that. As the reception found its rhythm again, the laughter softened, and conversations carried an undercurrent of quick, stolen glances toward me. Not the kind that came from gossip, but the kind that came from quiet recalibration. The father of the groom, a retired Coast Guard officer, made his way over. He leaned in, almost conspiratorial. They don't hand out medals like that to just anyone. You've done something worth remembering. I thanked him, but my gaze drifted toward Rachel, who was dancing with our mother under the swaying lights. For a moment, I wondered if she'd heard what Dad had said earlier, or if it would even matter to her. This was her night, and I wanted to keep it free of the kind of shadows only years of family history could cast. I slipped outside, the cooler night air wrapping around me like a welcome reprieve, carrying the faint scent of the nearby river. Out on the lawn, the white lights strung between the oaks swayed gently in the evening breeze. I drew a long breath, letting the cool air cut through the tightness in my chest. A tug at my sleeve made me glance down. It was the teenage boy from inside, the one who had started it all. His expression was uncertain. I didn't mean to embarrass you, he said, shuffling his feet. It's just, my uncle's in Special Forces. I've heard the stories. And seeing you on TV like that, I didn't think people like you existed in the Navy. I crouched so we were eye to eye. People like me, I smiled faintly. What you saw on TV, that's one moment. The real work happens when no one's looking. That's what keeps the mission alive. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that meant he might carry those words for a while. When I turned back toward the tent, I could see my father through the open flap, laughing again with one of his old army friends. If he felt any different about me now, he wasn't going to say, and maybe that was fine. Because here's the thing I've learned. You don't always get the apology you want or the recognition you think you deserve. Sometimes the win is simply living in a way that makes the truth undeniable. I stepped back inside, the music swelling, Rachel spinning in her gown. The shards of crystal were gone, but I stood just as I had before, tall, steady, certain of exactly who I was. I didn't see the knock so much as feel it, 3 quick thuds that went straight through the wood and into my chest. When I opened the door, my parents stepped over the threshold as if the porch belonged to them, with my brother right behind, already looking past me into the living room like he had a claim I hadn't heard about. My name is Chelsea Dean, and I bought this house with overtime shifts and the kind of quiet that keeps you alive when no one's watching. I kept my hand on the knob. They didn't ask to come in. They just came. Ethan drifted toward the hallway, running his fingers along the wall the way he used to skim my dresser before pocketing what he wanted. Plenty of space, he said, smiling like he knew something I didn't. For a family, the word landed like a bruise. Behind me, coffee cooled on the counter, rain lifted off the driveway, and the new deadbolt I'd installed caught the light. Mira laughed from the kitchen doorway, like she'd discovered a Pinterest project. My mother's eyes were already measuring curtains. My father stood silent, hands in pockets, as if waiting for his name to be etched on the deed. I followed them from room to room without stepping aside. Ethan paused in the master bedroom, gaze sweeping. Just for a second. I was back on the stairs of our old split level, his palm flat on my back, my foot missing the step. The banister bruised my ribs. He cried first. I got grounded. "Let's talk later," he said. "There's a plan that works for everyone." "The last time your plan worked for everyone," I replied. "It didn't include me." The house held its breath. The porch light was still on. Though it was noon, my hand tightened on the door. If they moved one more inch, I would stop being polite. I would defend what I built. The truth is, I used to believe the silence was my fault. When I was 10, I stopped singing around the house because my mother said my voice gave her a headache. When I was 12, Ethan took $50 from Dad's wallet, and I got grounded for stirring up drama. And by the time I turned 13, I learned the art of vanishing into my books, behind closed doors, and inside headphones turned just loud enough to block the sound of dinner conversations I was never invited to join. The house I grew up in wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by the version of me they wished I'd become. Softer, quieter, more agreeable, more like Ethan, with his golden boy smirk and his endless talent for being forgiven. He crashed Dad's truck. Boys will be boys. He flunked 2 classes, school's not for everyone. He skipped curfew, lied, stole, fought, and I was the one who needed therapy for being too sensitive. I remember one Thanksgiving when I told a story at the table, something small, about a science project I got full marks on. The table fell quiet. Then Ethan launched into a tale about sneaking into the football game without a ticket, and everyone laughed. I wasn't invited to speak again that evening. I didn't run away from home. That makes it sound dramatic, like I left in a blaze of rebellion. No, I left quietly, at 17, with 2 duffel bags and a note that said, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." No one called. No one came looking. I think a part of them was relieved. The world I landed in wasn't kind. I slept on couches, ate fast food leftovers, worked late shifts folding towels or shelving produce. I learned to live without heat, without backup plans, without anyone checking in. But that silence, it stopped being punishment. It started to feel like control. And when I found that battered camper behind a mechanic's lot, all rust and mildew and leaky seals, I didn't see a coffin. I saw a key to something no one could take from me. I parked the camper behind a strip mall in a town no one brags about living in, just far enough from the city that rent was still a joke, but close enough that work wasn't impossible to find. It leaked when it rained, groaned in the wind, and smelled like old paint and despair. But it locked. It was mine. And that mattered more than I could explain. I got lucky. Or maybe just persistent. A friend of a friend tipped me off about a shipping warehouse on the edge of town. They needed hands, didn't ask questions, and paid more than minimum wage. I showed up early, stayed late, kept my head down. The foreman, Roy, was the kind of man who didn't smile much, but noticed everything. One day, he spotted the camper on my truck and said, "You hook that to a power source," yet I shook my head. The next morning, there was a heavy-duty extension cord coiled beside the back fence with a post-it that read, "Don't trip." I never said thank you, not with words, but I picked up every weekend shift, every late-night offload, and never complained. That was the deal. I started to rebuild myself from the outside in. First came the insulation, patched by hand, then new tires, paid in cash. I joined a 24-hour gym just to use the showers, on cold mornings. I ran the heater off Roy's line and drank gas station coffee from a cracked mug while fog laced the inside of the windows. That camper became more than a shell. It was proof that I could live without asking, survive without begging, and choose when to let someone in. I kept my world small. No social media, no holiday calls. I didn't want to explain where I'd been, or why my last mailing address was a parking lot behind a shuttered laundromat. Then, one afternoon, after unloading 12 pallets in the rain, I saw a flyer taped to the break room bulletin board. A house for sale, small, cheap, close. I stared at it for days before taking the number. And when I did, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the possibility that this finally was the beginning of something no one could undo. The house was nothing special, not at first glance. A faded blue single-story, with a sagging front step and shutters that had lost the will to hang straight. But the moment I saw it in person, something shifted. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't big. But it stood there like it had survived things. 2. The seller barely asked questions. Cash deposit, quick close. I had just enough in savings, down to the last 100. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in a loan office that smelled like stale carpet and old coffee. When the pen left the page, I didn't smile. I cried. Not loud, not messy, just this steady stream of disbelief, sliding down my cheeks like my body couldn't quite believe we'd done it. I didn't tell anyone. I just drove by at night, parked across the street with my lights off, watching the porch light flicker on and off with the wind. It felt like the house was breathing, like it had been waiting. When I moved in, it was with a mattress on the floor, a borrowed space heater, and the same cracked mug from the camper. The walls were scuffed, the plumbing wheezed, but it was dry, it was warm, it was mine. The first night I slept there, I wrapped myself in 2 blankets and stared at the ceiling until the quiet settled around me like a blanket I didn't have to share. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up without fear. Over the next few days, I cleaned every corner, scrubbed the stains, patched the drywall. I parked the truck around back and unloaded the camper carefully, lowering it near the fence like a relic of another life. I covered it with a tarp, but I didn't let it go. I wanted it there, a reminder. 1 week later, I took a photo, just the porch light and house number glowing in the dark, and posted it online with 5 words, "Built this life from nothing." I didn't expect anyone to notice, and that was my first mistake. It started with a comment under the photo, just 1 word from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Finally, then a message from a girl I used to work with at the diner. "Proud of you." Nothing big, nothing dramatic, but enough to make me wonder who had shared the post. 3 weeks passed. I was planting lavender by the walkway when I heard footsteps. I looked up and froze. My entire family was on my porch. Ethan, Mira, my parents, standing there like a casual Sunday visit, like they hadn't let me disappear into silence for years. No phone call, no heads up, no permission. I didn't move, but the door was already open, and they stepped inside as if it were still Christmas morning in our childhood home, and I was just the bitter girl in the corner. Mira wandered into the kitchen, running her hands along the countertop. My mother smiled at the hallway, like she was cataloging where the baby crib might go. "You've got so much space for just one person," she said sweetly, but the edge in her voice was sharp enough to cut drywall. My father stood near the window, expression blank, as if he was already rearranging the living room in his head. I followed them silently, my body tense, but my face unreadable. Ethan stopped in the master bedroom, nodded approvingly. "We've been thinking," he started, casually leaning on the doorframe. "Mira's pregnant again. This neighborhood's perfect. Great schools. Close to my work. We could really use the room. You'd still be here. Of course, maybe in the back room. Or the camper again. You liked it in there, right?" I didn't speak. I couldn't, not yet. He went on like he was laying out a generous offer, not trespassing into my life again. "We'd need some ground rules. Obviously. Quiet hours. No guests unless we say so. Mira would handle meals." Something in me snapped, not in rage, but in clarity. This wasn't a visit. It was a takeover. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom Ethan had just claimed with his voice, not his hands, and felt the air leave my lungs. My palms rested on the frame, steady, grounding me. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't shake. It was quiet, so quiet, he had to lean forward to hear me. No. He blinked, confused, like he'd misheard. What do you mean? No, I mean you're not moving in. You're not setting rules. You're not taking the master bedroom while I sleep in a camper. You don't get to walk into the only thing I've ever built and claim it because it's convenient for you. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him interrupt. I had waited too long to say this. I was reasonable when Mom believed you instead of me. I was reasonable when you stole my savings and blamed it on a misunderstanding. I was even reasonable when I lived behind a warehouse while you played house with a woman who texted me to mock my living situation. His smile faltered. That ever-present smugness gave way to something else. Panic. Maybe the beginnings of shame. This is my house. Ethan, mine. You don't get to come in and rearrange it like I'm just borrowing the space. He tried again, voice softer. Chelsea, come on. This is family. We're trying to work something out here. No. I repeated. What you're doing isn't compromise. It's colonization. There was silence. Even Mira, who'd been clinking glasses in the kitchen like she already lived here, had stopped moving. Ethan left without finishing his sentence or his coffee. For the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't feel like exile. It felt like peace. But peace, I would learn, has a price. And the next time I came home, my key didn't work. At first, I thought I'd used the wrong key. I tried again, slower this time, pressing it gently into the lock like maybe the metal would remember me, but it didn't turn. My breath fogged in the early evening air. The porch light on a timer glowed above me, casting long shadows across the steps I'd painted myself. Then I saw it. The welcome mat was crooked. The blinds in the living room, which I always kept drawn tight, were open, and parked just down the block, tailgate half open, was Ethan's truck. I walked around the side, heartbeat climbing. Through the window, I saw boxes stacked in my hallway. My hallway. Mira stood barefoot, arranging throw pillows on the couch. Ethan appeared behind her, holding one of my blankets like it was just another item they'd picked up from the store. I knocked hard once, twice. Mira turned and smirked. Ethan came to the door slowly, like I was a nuisance, like he'd been expecting me. What are you doing here? He asked. All innocence and arrogance. This is my house, I said, my voice cold. He held up a folded piece of paper. You signed a rental agreement, said we could stay a while. I didn't even have to look. The signature was mine, but not mine. Sloppy. Forged. You forged that. Mira appeared behind him, arms crossed over her chest. Don't be dramatic. Chelsea, you left the door unlocked. We just made it official. I pulled out my phone and hit record. You're trespassing, I said calmly. And you broke my lock. Ethan reached to block the lens. Mira slapped the phone from my hand. It clattered to the floor, but kept filming, catching her voice shrieking, my name, and the start of chaos. I called the police. They arrived in under 10 minutes, and by 20 past. Ethan and Mira were dragging their things back to the truck under the watchful eyes of two officers angry, embarrassed, exposed. When the door clicked shut behind them, I locked it twice. Then I stood there, breathing in the warmth they'd tried to steal. I didn't say anything. I just uploaded the video. No caption, no explanation. Just the footage of Ethan waving that fake lease, Mira knocking the phone from my hand, and my voice steady, calm, naming exactly what they were doing. I didn't think it would matter. I wasn't looking for attention. But the algorithm has a way of finding truth when it's clear and ugly. Comments started trickling in. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, cousins, old co-workers, even a woman who used to babysit me when I was 7. One message stood out. It was from my aunt in Oregon, who I hadn't heard from in over a decade. Now it makes sense. She wrote, I always wondered why you disappeared. My parents didn't respond publicly. No angry rebuttal, no denial, just silence. The same silence they used to punish me, Only now. It sounded like defeat. Then, one afternoon, they showed up again. No yelling this time. No smug glances or suitcases in tow. Just my mother and father, standing on the porch like they were waiting for judgment. Ethan's having a hard time. My mother began. This video, it's made things worse, my father added, eyes heavy. You've made your point, she continued. Can't you just let it go? For the family, I didn't flinch. I didn't invite them in. I stood there in the doorway, light slanting across the floor behind me, and said, I am doing this for the family, the part that didn't try to steal from me. Before they could answer, a car pulled into the driveway. My cousin Naomi stepped out, shopping bag in hand, and came to stand beside me. My parents didn't say another word. That was the last time they tried to guilt me. That weekend, I made a copy of my house key for Naomi. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt chosen. The message came in quietly. Like most of Ethan's guilt, short, vague. A little too late. Can we talk? It's about the kids and rent. He didn't mention the video, the police, the forged lease, or how Mira had vanished off social media like a shadow swallowed by light. He just showed up in my driveway, hands in his pockets, eyes bouncing everywhere but toward me. She left, he said. Didn't even take Luca. Formula's expensive. I'm behind on everything. He didn't ask to move in. He asked for money. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. I led him inside, opened my laptop, and walked him through the numbers: property tax, insurance, repairs. Then I showed him a spreadsheet of tenants. 2 women from work had been renting the basement studio. Quiet, clean, always paid on time. I'm not a bank. Ethan. And this house isn't your bailout. He didn't argue. He just nodded, lips pressed tight, and walked back to his truck. A few days later, Mira drove by, leaned out the window, and screamed at my house like it could hear her. She called me a thief, a traitor, a cold, barren witch. I didn't flinch. That night, I opened the tarp on the camper and aired it out. Not for me. For Luca. Ethan came back, this time holding his son's hand. He didn't ask for much, just space, quiet, stability. I let him park the camper in the backyard, under one condition: no Mira, no surprise guests, no chaos. I wrote it down, made him sign, recorded our handshake. At night, I'd hear the faint thump of a soccer ball in the yard, laughter I didn't recognize, footsteps that didn't make me tense. And once, long after bedtime, I found Ethan sitting on the camper floor, his head in his hands. I ruined everything. He whispered, I let her ruin us. I let them ruin you. I didn't forgive him, but I let him say it. And somehow, that was enough. Later that week, my parents came by. No lectures, no excuses, just a quiet apology. You didn't deserve it, my mother said. For once, I believed her. And as the house settled into stillness that night, with Naomi reading upstairs, tenants in the basement, and a boy chasing fireflies in the yard, I realized something simple but true. I had always been alone in that family. But I wasn't lonely anymore. My name is Paige Simmons, and last Tuesday, I found myself staring at a bank statement that made my stomach drop. The numbers didn't make sense. Our daughter's entire college fund, every single cent we had saved for 13 years, was gone. The balance was a flat, merciless zero. The bank manager's voice was careful, almost apologetic, as he slid the printed statement across the desk. It was a full transfer, he said, eyes darting toward my daughter, Ava, sitting beside me. Same day withdrawal, authorized by a family member. Ava's small hand tightened around mine. Her eyes searched my face for reassurance, but all I could give her was a measured breath. The name on the transaction glared up at me like a cruel joke. Celeste Murray. My sister, outside. The city carried on cars rushing past, strangers sipping coffee. Inside, the world I thought I knew had shifted. I didn't know why she'd done it yet, But I knew one thing: Celeste had just declared a war she wouldn't see coming, and I wasn't going to fight it alone. The day after the discovery, I drove straight to my parents' old neighborhood, the one Celeste had never really left. Her penthouse loomed over the river, all glass and chrome, like a monument to excess. I didn't bother calling ahead. The concierge recognized me immediately, but hesitated, his eyes flicking to the security desk. "Ms. Murray is hosting guests," he said, as if that explained anything. I smiled, though it felt like my teeth might crack. "She'll want to see me." Inside the elevator, Ava's absence felt like a hollow space at my side. I'd left her with my husband, Mason, not wanting her to hear whatever was about to be said. The elevator doors opened onto a world dripping with imported marble, muted lighting, and the faint scent of something expensive burning in crystal holders. Celeste stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a champagne flute in hand, her back to me. When she turned, her smile was pure performance, wide enough for her guests, sharp enough for me. "Paige," she said, like we were catching up over brunch. "I wasn't expecting you." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so her friends couldn't hear. "You emptied Ava's college fund." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "Don't be dramatic." "I moved the money. It's safer with me. You'll thank me later." I could feel heat rising in my chest, but I kept my tone even. "It wasn't your money to touch." She sipped her champagne. The picture of unbothered confidence. "Family resources should be shared. You're just upset because you think Ava's entitled to all of it." "She's not." The urge to shout was nearly overwhelming, but I remembered Ava's hand in mine at the bank, the way her voice trembled when she asked if this meant she couldn't go to the college she'd dreamed of. I took a step back, scanning the penthouse, the designer furniture, the art on the walls. Every inch screamed of where our money had gone. "I'm going to fix this," I told her quietly. Celeste tilted her head, amused. "Fix it? Paige, you wouldn't even know where to start." But she was wrong. I knew exactly where to start. The first step wasn't lawyers. Not yet. Lawyers meant months of delays, legal fees, and Celeste spinning stories about misunderstandings until the truth drowned in paperwork. No, this had to be faster, cleaner. When I got home, Ava was at the kitchen table with her laptop, earbuds in. She looked up when she saw me, her expression searching my face for answers. I slid into the chair across from her. "She's not giving it back," I said. "Not willingly." Ava's jaw tightened, but she didn't cry. "My daughter has always had my stubborn streak, so we take it back," she said simply. I hesitated. "It's not that simple." She closed her laptop, pushing it toward me. "Mom, you forget who you're talking to. I'm 13, not 5, and I know exactly how she got into that account." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" Ava leaned in. "She used Grandpa's old joint account login, the one he gave you before he passed. But you never changed the security questions. I've seen her snooping through your office before. She probably guessed the answers." I stared at her, stunned not just by the insight, but by the fact that she'd pieced it together in hours when I'd been reeling for days. "Mom," she continued, "we can track the transfer, and if we can prove it came from that account without authorization, the bank has to act. No lawyers, just fraud investigation." It wasn't revenge in her voice, it was precision. A plan. That night, we worked side by side. Ava navigated the bank's online interface like she'd been doing it for years, pulling up transaction histories, timestamps, and even tracing the account the money landed in. It was Celeste's personal account. No trusts, no corporate shells, just her name in bold letters. By midnight, we had compiled a full report: screenshots, digital records, even the IP address of the device that accessed the account. The next morning, I walked into the bank with Ava's neatly organized file in my hands. The branch manager's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "Mrs. Simmons, this is substantial. We'll have to escalate this immediately." Good, I thought. Let Celeste try to talk her way out of this one. By the end of that week, the dominoes started to fall. It began with a phone call Celeste clearly hadn't expected. I was pouring coffee when my phone lit up with her name. Against my better judgment, I answered. "What the hell did you do?" she snapped. her voice pitched higher than usual. I took a slow sip. "Good morning to you too, Celeste." "My account's been frozen," she hissed. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have your card declined at Bergdorf's?" I almost laughed, but I kept my voice even. "You mean the account you funded with money stolen from your niece's college fund?" "That wasn't stolen," she said quickly, like if she said it fast enough it would be true. "It was a loan. You wouldn't understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut in. "And so does the bank's fraud department." There was a sharp intake of breath on her end, then a cold, flat silence. "You think you're clever? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Before I could respond, she hung up. By that afternoon, I started getting texts from mutual acquaintances, subtle little feelers, asking if everything was okay between me and my sister. Clearly, Celeste was doing damage control, trying to get ahead of the story before it spread. But she underestimated how fast word travels when the truth is this juicy. 2 days later, Ava came home from school with wide eyes. "Mom, Aunt Celeste came to my school." My blood ran cold. "She what?" "She was waiting outside with some stupid designer tote, saying she wanted to talk to me about family misunderstandings." I told the office, and they walked me out the back. That was the moment my patience evaporated. It wasn't enough to freeze her account. She needed to understand that crossing the line into my daughter's life was non-negotiable. I called our lawyer not to sue, but to put a restraining order in motion. We already had the paper trail, the bank's statement, and her uninvited stunt at Ava's school. By the end of the day, the forms were filed. The next time Celeste tried to get near us, it wouldn't be a polite phone call from the bank. It would be a uniformed officer at her door. The court date for the restraining order came faster than I expected. Celeste, of course, showed up dressed like she was attending a red carpet gala floor-length silk, diamond earrings catching the light, and a smirk that dared me to blink first. She didn't know I'd come armed with more than just a lawyer. Ava sat beside me, her posture straight, eyes forward. She wasn't here to testify, just to remind her aunt of exactly who she'd tried to manipulate. When the judge asked for evidence, our attorney laid it out bank statements showing the transfer from Ava's college fund to Celeste's personal account, a signed withdrawal slip with her signature, and the note from the bank's fraud investigation confirming unauthorized use. Celeste tried to interrupt. All faux outrage. "That was a family arrangement. You can't criminalize family." The judge's expression didn't change. "Family or not, misappropriation of funds is still misappropriation, and visiting a minor at her school without parental consent is unacceptable." For the first time, Celeste's face faltered. Then came the moment Ava had been waiting for. Our lawyer handed over a USB drive security footage from the school, showing Celeste pacing outside the gates, glancing around, clutching her tote like it contained state secrets. When the clip ended, the room was silent except for the shuffle of papers. The judge leaned back, eyes on Celeste. "Ms. Whitford, your actions show a clear disregard for boundaries and the well-being of your niece. The restraining order is granted." Celeste's smirk dissolved completely. Walking out of the courtroom, Ava slipped her hand into mine. "Does this mean she can't come near us anymore?" I nodded. "Not without breaking the law." But the story didn't end there. The next day, a mutual friend sent me a link, an online auction listing Celeste's penthouse furniture, art, even the infamous crystal chandelier she'd bragged about for years. The frozen accounts had done more than inconvenience her shopping. They'd crippled her ability to keep up with her penthouse mortgage. Ava peeked over my shoulder, grinning. "Guess she'll have to find a smaller place now." I laughed softly. Some lessons cost more than money. Celeste had tried to take away my daughter's future. In the end, she'd gambled with her own and lost. I had always believed that money leaves footprints, no matter how carefully someone tries to cover them. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, I opened my laptop and pulled up every online banking statement I could access. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, the weight of what I might find pressing on my chest. It didn't take long. The transfer to the escrow account had been rerouted, split into smaller transactions, each labeled as design services or consultation fees. I recognized none of the companies. When I clicked deeper, they all traced back to a single-shell LLC registered under a name that was suspiciously close to my sister's, just one letter off. I leaned back, staring at the screen. This wasn't carelessness. This was deliberate. She had built a pipeline to siphon my daughter's future into her marble and glass penthouse. The image of her standing there during our last conversation, smiling faintly as she insisted it was a misunderstanding, burned through my mind. But I didn't print anything. Not yet. Printing meant acting, and acting meant alerting her. Instead, I copied every statement, every shell company registration, and every date into a secure drive, then backed it up twice. Once on a cloud server she couldn't reach. Once on an encrypted USB I kept in my desk drawer. By midnight, I had a neat folder labeled Lily's Fund. Evidence. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. This wasn't just about getting the money back anymore. It was about making sure she could never do this again to Lily. To anyone. The next morning, I called an old friend from college, someone who now worked in financial fraud investigations. I kept my voice calm as I explained I had a family matter that needed reviewing. She didn't ask for details, just gave me an address, and told me to bring everything in person. When I hung up, Lily was already dressed for school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked at me with that quiet, knowing expression she'd worn since this all began. "Did you find it?" she asked. I managed a small smile. "More than enough." The office my friend directed me to was tucked into the 5th floor of a nondescript building downtown. The kind of place you'd walk past without a second glance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and toner, and the blinds were half drawn to keep out the sharp winter light. Marla, taller than I remembered, with streaks of silver now threading through her hair, greeted me with a handshake that felt both firm and personal. We didn't waste time on small talk. I slid the envelope across her desk, the one holding the USB, and a printed index of every file. Her eyes scanned the list, pausing on the name of the shell company. "This," she said, tapping the page, "is sloppy work. Whoever set it up didn't expect anyone to look beyond the first layer. I didn't tell her that the person behind it was my own sister. That detail could wait until the evidence was airtight. For now, I needed the machinery to start moving quietly, without Celeste catching the scent. Marla outlined the plan. First, a discreet audit to track the full path of the stolen money. Then, a legal freeze subtle enough to avoid triggering a withdrawal rush, firm enough to keep assets from vanishing. If everything aligned, we could have an injunction in place within weeks. I listened, nodding, though my thoughts kept drifting to Lily. She'd been quieter lately, spending more time in her room, sketching in that notebook she carried everywhere. It wasn't fair that a 13-year-old had to learn this kind of betrayal so young. When the meeting ended, I stepped back into the cold, the city's hum wrapping around me. Across the street, in the glass reflection of an office tower, I caught sight of myself shoulders squared, jaw set. I realized I wasn't just a mother trying to get her daughter's money back. I was someone about to dismantle a very polished lie. That night, as I prepared dinner, Lily slid into the kitchen and set her notebook on the counter. She flipped it open to a page filled with detailed sketches of floor plans. "Aunt Celeste's penthouse," she said softly. "In case you need to know where things are." I met her gaze. My daughter wasn't just watching. She was planning too. The elevator ride to Celeste's penthouse felt like ascending into another world, each floor shedding the grit and noise of the city, until all that remained was polished silence. When the doors slid open, I was met with a wall of glass framing the skyline, the Hudson glinting in the distance. Celeste appeared from the kitchen, champagne flute in hand, dressed in silk, the color of old gold. Her smile was slow, calculated. "Paige, I didn't expect you to come up unannounced." I stepped inside without asking, the soft click of my heels echoing on the marble. "We need to talk." She gestured toward the seating area, all cream leather and curated art books. But I didn't sit. Instead, I placed a slim folder on the glass coffee table between us. Inside was the printout from Marla's audit, every transfer, every false invoice, every trail leading back to her. Her eyes flickered over the first page. Then she laughed. "You've always been dramatic. If you think some paperwork is going to, don't." My voice cut through hers, steadier than I felt. "I know you drained Lily's college fund. I know about the shell company. And I know you used it to buy this place." Her laugh faltered. but she kept her tone airy. Even if that were true, what could you possibly do about it? I leaned forward just enough for her to see the steel in my eyes. By the time you pour your next glass, your accounts will be frozen. And when you try to charm your way out of this, you'll find the court doesn't take kindly to stealing from your own niece. Her knuckles whitened around the stem of her glass. You wouldn't dare! Lily deserves better than an aunt who sees her future as a down payment. I said, and you're about to find out exactly how far I'll go. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass, no longer the sister who once made excuses for her, but the mother ready to dismantle her lies brick by brick. Behind me, the sound of her glass setting down was sharp, almost brittle. For the first time, Celeste understood she wasn't untouchable. 2 weeks later, the hearing was over. Celeste sat at the defendant's table, her hair immaculate, but her eyes restless, darting between the judge and the documents spread before her. The same papers she had once scoffed at now sealed her fate. The ruling was clear full restitution of Lily's college fund, penalties for fraud, and a lien placed on her penthouse until every cent was paid. The property that had been her pride would now be the guarantee of a future she had tried to steal. Lily sat beside me, small but unshaken, her hand wrapped around mine. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and spoke with a calm that startled the entire courtroom. I don't want her to go to jail. I just want her to understand that trust isn't something you can buy. It's something you can lose forever. The words hung in the air, heavier than any sentence. Celeste didn't look at me. She didn't look at Lily. She just stared at the table, her mask slipping in quiet defeat. Outside, the city was bright and loud again, a stark contrast to the stillness inside the courtroom. Lily and I walked out together, the weight I'd carried for months finally lifting from my shoulders. That night, she asked if I thought Celeste would change. I told her change was her choice, but protecting what's ours will always be ours. Weeks later, a check arrived, partial payment, but the first in a series. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about proof that we could stand our ground, that even the people closest to us couldn't rewrite the truth without consequence. The penthouse eventually sold. I heard she moved into a modest apartment downtown. Maybe humility would find her there, maybe not. But that was no longer my burden to carry. For me and Lily, the future felt ours again, intact, unbroken, and entirely our own. And as for Celeste, she learned a lesson she never expected. Some debts can be repaid in money, but others leave a balance that lasts a lifetime. My name is Sierra Lopez, and last Thursday I found out I didn't exist, at least not on my sister's wedding guest list. It wasn't a mistake. Rebecca doesn't make mistakes. She makes decisions that look polite from the outside and cut deep where no one else can see. I stared at the digital seating chart a friend had sent me. My name nowhere between the endless rows of family and close friends. The pale blue font might as well have read, "Not wanted." I closed my laptop before the anger could settle in, because anger has a way of leaving fingerprints, and I'd spent too many years being told I was too intense, too serious, too much. The phone rang. Unknown number. My first thought was another wrong number spammer, but the voice on the other end stopped me, cold. Sierra, it's Admiral James Donovan. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since the mission we'd both promised never to talk about. He was my father's boss once, long before retirement, but to me, he was the man who'd looked me in the eye and said I had more courage than half his officers. "I hear your sister's wedding is Saturday," he said. I wasn't invited. I told him. "Then that's their mistake," he replied. "Because you'll be there. And when you walk into that room, no one will forget your name." I didn't answer right away, but in that moment, I knew I was going. I wish I could tell you Rebecca and I used to be close, that somewhere along the way, life just pulled us in different directions. The truth is, we were never on the same path. She was the golden one from the start, blonde hair that caught the light. Easy laugh. The kind of charm that made teachers overlook her missed homework because she promised to bring cupcakes next time. I was the quiet one with dark hair, a stubborn streak, and grades that didn't need sugarcoating. My victories came in science fairs and essay competitions, which, in our house, earned polite nods before the conversation slid back to Rebecca's latest school play. By the time I joined the Navy as a cryptologic linguist, my parents had already decided that my life was a mystery they didn't need to solve. When I tried to explain what I did, my mother just said, "Well, at least you're getting paid to read." I stopped trying after that. Rebecca, meanwhile, built her life like a glossy magazine spread business school, high-profile job in marketing, a fiancé with a jawline straight out of a soap opera, and yet, no matter how high she climbed, she never missed a chance to remind me I was the family's covert one. Like my discretion was just another way of saying invisible. The last time we'd been in the same room was 2 years ago, at my father's retirement dinner. Rebecca had leaned in during dessert and said, "Smile more, Sierra. You're making people think you don't want to be here." I'd smiled then, but only because Admiral Donovan was sitting 3 seats away and had caught my eye with the faintest shake of his head. Now, sitting alone in my apartment with his voice still echoing in my ears, I couldn't help but think about that night. He'd been the only one at the table who asked what I was working on, and the only one who noticed when I kept my answers vague because of classified boundaries. If he said I should be at this wedding, there was a reason, and it wasn't for Rebecca's sake. I glanced at the unopened invitation envelope still on my bookshelf, the one I'd received for my father's retirement, but not for my sister's wedding, and felt the familiar tightness in my chest. This time, I thought, I wouldn't be on the outside looking in. The next morning, I woke up with that odd clarity that comes after a decision has been made for you. Admiral Donovan hadn't told me how this would happen, only that I'd be there. It left me with a dozen unanswered questions, the biggest being, what would Rebecca do when she saw me? The thing about my sister is, she doesn't raise her voice to win. She edits, she trims, she cuts out what doesn't fit the story she's selling, and somehow the absence looks tasteful. When she was 12, she reorganized my bookshelf and never put back my journal. When we were in college, she RSVP'd to my honors presentation with regrets and called it support because she sent flowers the week after. Erasing me from the wedding wasn't a tantrum, it was branding. I made coffee and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, breathless the way people sound when they want you to think they're busier than you. I told her about the seating chart. She said there must have been a software issue and that Rebecca was handling so much and couldn't possibly keep track of every line item. I asked if she wanted me there. The silence was short, but not empty. "Let's not make this about you." "Sierra," she said at last, "it's Rebecca's day." After we hung up, my father texted a thumbs-up emoji and a sentence that could have been copy-pasted from a corporate memo. "Proud of you for being gracious." Gracious! I set the mug in the sink and realized my hands were shaking. At noon, Admiral Donovan called back. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't offer sympathy. He moved to action the way some men breathe. "I've spoken to the venue coordinator," he said. "You'll be on the security list as my guest. Bring identification. I'll handle the rest." Why I asked, not for a legal justification, but to understand why I mattered enough for him to interfere, because people who do hard things quietly tend to be punished for their quiet. He said, "I'm correcting that once, publicly." It wasn't flattery. He said it like weather. "What do you need from me? Arrive 10 minutes before the reception begins. Wear what makes you feel like yourself. I'll have a microphone." He paused. "And Sierra, don't apologize for walking in." After the call, I pulled the navy suit from the back of my closet. It wasn't new, but it was tailored, the fabric heavy enough to make a statement without shouting. I pinned a small lapel insignia inside the jacket where only a careful eye would notice. It wasn't about broadcasting service. It was about remembering the part of me that had learned to be steady under pressure. I drafted a simple card for Rebecca and her fiancé. No speech, no irony. Just 3 lines wishing them a life steeped in kindness, because kindness can ferment into courage if you let it sit long enough. I tucked the card into a small white envelope and slid it into my bag. The day before the wedding, I stopped by my father's house to drop off some restored family photos. He wasn't home, but I ran into Rebecca's maid of honor in the driveway, balancing a garment bag and a bouquet of eucalyptus. She looked at me like I was a road hazard she'd been warned about. "Hey," she said, smiling with only her teeth. "Rebecca said you decided not to come." "I decided nothing," I replied, stepping aside so she could pass. She lingered, watching me like she might report my posture. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan clicked with the soft rhythm of a metronome, keeping time with a chorus of questions. What if Admiral overestimated his welcome? What if my mother made a scene? What if the whole thing became another story in which I was painted as the difficult one near dawn? I went running along the river, the way I used to before early briefings. The sky was the gray of a pressed uniform, the air sharp enough to sting. Somewhere between mile 2 and 3, the questions thinned, leaving only one thought: I belonged in any room that tried to pretend I didn't. On the day, I arrived at the hotel early and sat in the lobby where the carpet swallowed sound. A pianist in the corner played something familiar and expensive. Guests drifted by in satin and small talk, not sparing me a glance. At 10 till, I rose and walked to the check-in desk outside the ballroom. The coordinator scanned her list, found my name under Admiral James Donovan, and handed me a ribboned place card. As I approached the ballroom doors, the hum of voices swelled. I slid the card into my pocket. I wasn't here to fight for a chair at their table. I was here to take my name back. The ballroom was a landscape of candlelight and curated perfection. White florals arched over the head table. Crystal glasses aligned like soldiers on parade. Conversations buzzed over the soft strain of a string quartet. I scanned the room, my eyes catching on familiar faces that registered me with varying degrees of surprise and discomfort. Rebecca was at the far end, in a gown that belonged in a bridal magazine. Her hair sculpted to frame a smile that didn't waver until she saw me. For a split second, her eyes widened. Then, with the precision of a PR professional, she smoothed it away and turned to whisper something to her maid of honor. I kept walking. Admiral Donovan was near the center table, shaking hands with my father. He caught sight of me and straightened, his presence commanding enough to shift the air. My father's eyes flicked to mine: confusion, irritation, calculation, all compressed into one tight glance. The Admiral gestured for me to join him. "Sierra?" he said warmly, loud enough to carry to the nearest tables. "You clean up well?" I smiled just enough for him to know I appreciated the line, then took the seat he indicated. My mother leaned slightly toward my father, lips moving in a whisper that looked like, "Why is she here?" A server filled my glass with water. I wrapped my fingers around it, grounding myself in the cool weight. The Admiral stood, adjusting his jacket, and approached the small podium meant for toasts. The quartet faded out, conversations dimmed, and all eyes shifted toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying without strain, "I'd like to take a moment before we continue celebrating this fine couple to acknowledge someone whose name may not be on your program, but whose presence deserves recognition." A murmur swept the room. Rebecca's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. "This young woman," he continued, motioning toward me, "once stood between me and a situation that could have ended very badly. Because of her skill, her judgment, and her courage, I'm here today to raise a glass with all of you. She has spent much of her life doing hard things quietly, without applause, and I believe it's time that changed." The quiet in the room was absolute now, every head turning my way. My father's jaw worked, as if grinding down words. "Please join me," the Admiral said, in recognizing Sierra Lopez. Applause broke out, not the polite smatter of hands meeting out of obligation, but the genuine, rising sound of people reacting to something they didn't expect. I stood slowly, not to drag the moment, but to feel its weight. My gaze skimmed over the tables, past relatives who'd last spoken to me in clipped holiday small talk, past former neighbors, past Rebecca's curated circle. She held my eyes for a beat, her smile frozen in place, but her posture betraying tension. I didn't offer her a nod. This wasn't her moment to accept or reject. "Thank you," I said simply, my voice steady. "For those who don't know me, I'm Rebecca's sister, and while I didn't think I'd be here tonight, I'm glad I am, not for speeches or explanations, but because sometimes showing up is its own answer." A few guests nodded. A couple clapped again. The Admiral returned to his seat, a small, unsatisfied glint in his eyes. As the noise of the room resumed, people began approaching, some curious, some genuinely warm. I answered questions lightly, never straying into details I couldn't share, letting the mystery work in my favor. From across the room, I felt Rebecca watching. She'd orchestrated my absence, but now every guest who left tonight would remember my presence, and there was no way to edit that out. The attention thinned eventually, as it always does, drifting back to the bride and groom, the dance floor, the clink of forks against plates. I slipped away from the center tables, weaving toward a quieter corner near the service doors. My pulse was steady now, but the air still buzzed against my skin. Rebecca found me there, her gown catching the light with every step. Up close, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You had no right," she said under her breath, her voice smooth enough to keep nearby guests from noticing. I tilted my head. "No right to attend my own sister's wedding." Her lips tightened. "To hijack the attention. This is my day. That's the beauty of it." I replied, "You still have your day, and I still have my name." For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the flicker of something resentment. Maybe fear. She glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure no one important was watching, then walked away without another word. A hand touched my elbow, my father. His smile was thin, but his eyes were searching. "You could have called me," he said. "Would it have made a difference?" I asked. He hesitated, and in that pause, I had my answer. "You've always been too quick to take offense," he murmured. "No," I said, keeping my voice even. "I've just stopped pretending exclusion is kindness." He exhaled, a short, almost imperceptible sigh, and stepped back into the crowd. I stayed in my corner until Admiral Donovan found me again, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "You handled that with restraint," he said. "I learned from the best," I replied, taking the glass. He smiled faintly. "They won't forget this. Not because you embarrassed them, because you showed them what presence looks like." I looked toward the dance floor, where Rebecca spun under the chandeliers, her laughter perfectly timed for the photographer. Maybe she'd edit the night in her mind later, tell herself the applause was just polite courtesy. That was fine. The truth didn't need her permission to exist. When the music shifted to a slow waltz, I set my glass down. "I should go," I said. "Leave when you're ready." The Admiral replied, "Not a second before." So I stayed another 10 minutes, long enough to greet an aunt who whispered, "Good to see you, mija," with a squeeze of my hand, and long enough to catch Rebecca looking my way again. Then I walked out through the grand doors, the hum of the ballroom fading behind me, my steps light on the marble floor. I hadn't come to make peace or to wage war. I'd come to be seen, and I had been. The reception moved forward as if nothing unusual had happened, but the air around me had changed. Servers glided between tables with plates of salmon and steak. The quartet shifted to livelier pieces, yet I could still feel the pulse of what had just happened. Rebecca stayed anchored at the head table, laughing a little too brightly at whatever her maid of honor whispered. My mother avoided looking in my direction, her focus fixed on the butter knife she kept repositioning beside her plate. My father wore the expression of a man calculating a strategy mid-battle. Guests continued to drift over old neighbors, distant cousins offering polite handshakes, and the occasional, "We had no idea," as if they were apologizing for something they hadn't personally done. I kept my answers short and warm, steering every conversation back toward congratulating the couple. The Admiral's introduction had done its work. I didn't need to overplay it. Midway through dessert, Rebecca finally approached. She stopped beside my chair, her smile professional enough to hide the tension in her jaw. "Glad you could make it," she said. "I'm sure you are," I replied, keeping my tone even. Her eyes narrowed, just slightly. This was supposed to be simple. Sierra, no drama. "I didn't bring any," I said, meeting her gaze. "I just walked in the door." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she straightened, gave a small nod, and walked away. I knew better than to expect more than that tonight. Later, as the dancing began and the crowd loosened, Admiral Donovan passed by my table. He didn't stop, just rested a hand briefly on my shoulder. It was enough. When the night began winding down, I slipped out before the bouquet toss, pausing in the lobby to take one last look at the ballroom. Through the open doors, I saw Rebecca twirling in her gown, guests cheering, the photographer's flash catching her mid-laugh. I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was leaving with my name intact, carried on the ripple of applause that no one could erase. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. I walked toward the curb, the quiet settling around me like something earned. The city was hushed when I stepped outside. The hum of traffic softened under the glow of street lamps. I stood for a moment, letting the night air cool my skin, and thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stayed on the edges, convinced she had to earn her place by being useful, invisible, agreeable. Tonight had been different. I hadn't given a speech about my worth or listed my accomplishments. I'd simply shown up and let the truth speak in its own time. And in that room, surrounded by people who once barely noticed me, the truth had been louder than I expected. It struck me then recognition from my family had been my longest pursuit, but it was never going to come in the way I'd imagined. What mattered now was recognizing myself without their permission. A black sedan pulled up, and Admiral Donovan stepped out just long enough to nod. "You handled it well," he said. "Thanks for the assist," I replied. "Just leveling the scales," he answered before disappearing into the car. I walked away with a quiet steadiness. I wasn't looking for reconciliation anymore. What I'd found tonight was better proof that I could step into any room, no matter who tried to keep me out, and still belong. And that, I realized, was mine to keep.